Okay, we've got 7 p.m. on the clock, and I'll wait just a minute to be sure everyone has time to get into Zoom and join the webinar. Okay, let's get started. Welcome everyone to the webinar about the Montville Township Schools bond referendum to be held on Tuesday, December 12th. I am Dr. Casey Shorter, Assistant Superintendent for the Montville School District, and I will be the moderator for tonight's info session, which we are holding as a webinar to give everyone the best chance of hearing both the information that is shared and the questions that are asked. This format will allow us to provide a nice recording for anyone who is unable to join us live tonight. We'll hear from some people who work for our district and who work within our district. Our panelists for tonight are Dr. Thomas Gorman, Superintendent of Schools, Ms. Katine Slunt, Business Administrator and Secretary for the Board of Education, Mr. Dave Malucci, the Principal at William Mason Elementary School, Mr. Will Ross, Senior Associate with Perrette Somgen Architects, Mr. Tony Solomini, a finance lawyer at the firm of Willens, Goldman and Spitzer. Mr. Solomini specializes in public bond sales. Before we hear from our panelists, we want to give everyone an idea of what we have planned for tonight so that you can bring up your questions at the right time. We'll alternate between hearing our panelists share information and respond to some questions from the public. And you can see the schedule of what we'll cover and the time slot set aside for questions. There are two ways for the public to submit questions. You can send a question to referendum@montville.net. And again, you can send a question to referendum@montville.net. And by the way, we have been answering questions sent to that email address for several months and will continue to do so. You can also use the question and answer feature of the Zoom webinar. If you move your cursor to the bottom of the screen, you should see the letters Q and A. Click on that icon to click and submit a question. As we do at Board of Education meetings, we will ask that you include your name and street address with your question. Whether you send it by email or through Q&A feature, we would like you to do those couple of things. If we need to research some information to provide a complete answer, we can do that if your email address is included. We also want to be sure everyone understands that similar questions may be combined or streamlined as a way to help the panelists answer as many questions as possible tonight. There are other ways to learn more about the bond referendum. We have multiple web pages with renderings, a lot of information, and a lot of frequently asked questions. Find those at www.montville.net/referendum. And I'll read that one more time. You can find a lot more information at www.montville.net/referendum. Also, this webinar is being recorded, and we will add the link to those pages for people who aren't able to join us tonight or weren't able to join us for the entire time. We're planning to wrap up around 8:30 tonight. However, we can stay on a little later if that means we can answer some more questions. So, okay, those are the ground rules. So let's get started. Superintendent Dr. Gorman will bring everybody up to speed on how Montville Township School District came to this point of holding a bond referendum on December 10th. Dr. Gorman?
Thank you very much. Really appreciate this time. I really appreciate you sharing.
I don't see anything, but
am I good with you? Okay.
Go ahead, Dr. Gorman.
So thank you for sharing this evening with us and learning more about the referendum. So we've been looking at this question for about the past 2 years, and the big question for tonight is why the referendum? There are three challenges that are before us right now. The first is space. We are beyond capacity at the elementary level, and we need to have more space to help with the enrollment issues that we're having to help keep Montville's attractiveness. And we need to make renovations to the classrooms to reflect the changing education settings. The second issue is security. We have done what we can without physically altering all the buildings with the security vestibules. And third is the HVAC, heating, ventilation, and air conditioning, for better ventilation and to make them more efficient in our schools. So those are the three main issues. We're paying for these improvements through the operating budget, would cost the taxpayers 100% of our costs. So what we're trying to do is offset these costs by going to the bond referendum and using it as a funding mechanism, which brings new source of state aid to the district. Montville residents are already paying into this, and other districts are accessing this type of pot of funding from the state. So state aid is one of the top reasons we're using this. And we will receive about $9.4 million of state aid to help offset the costs of this referendum project. The funding package is also strategically designed to help keep the local tax impact at a lower level. And by capturing the state aid, that will help us offset this as well. So the total that we're looking at for the asking for the taxpayers is really about $54 million. Now, we're doing this right now because fall of 2025 sounds like a far off target, but we're looking at a construction timeline of about 2.5 years. So voter action now puts Montville on track to reach this target for the future students and with the spacing crunch that we're going to have at that time. So we're going to be looking at a screen right now about the enrollment issues. So Montville is already over capacity right now, about 100 students. The elementary schools can handle, you can see right there, 1496 with that dotted line down there. So with the current housing in our township, we're already over our capacity in our elementary schools. And the planned housing will add another layer to this issue. The desirability of the school system is what's drawing people here to Montville. We have increased birth rates, which is a strong indicator that people want to move to Montville because they want to have children to attend the great schools here. And the new housing developments are a strong indicator of Montville's desirability. The developers want to build here because people want to live here, and the schools are a top draw. So if you're looking at the dotted line across the bottom, you see the 5 elementary schools can handle 1,500 students. And we are currently at that, on the left-hand side there, you see the yellow line, you will see that we're at 1,600 students right now. And that number will continue to grow. And that number is being made up of people moving into town because of post-COVID. We have higher birth rates. We have grandma and grandpa moving out and a family of 5 moving in. And we have some more construction going on in town. And you see how that number will grow. So over the next 5 years, you'll see that number about 250 to 300 will go, and that's without the planned housing. The planned housing of the 4 developments that are going on in town, 2 of them are online already, and we'll start to see students coming from those developments. That's the yellow line, and that yellow line will continue to grow as well. So over the next 5 years, you will have over 400 students over capacity at our elementary levels. On average, we're looking at about welcoming 2 students per week throughout the school year. So focusing on the future means being ready for the enrollment influx right now that has already started. Couples and families have decided to move into this town because of the school's desirability. So we're at a turning point to keep Montville on the path that made it attractive, and now we want to keep that attraction. In 2017, we made progress by tending to the most pressing needs at the time. We fixed the roofs, bathrooms, media centers, except at the high school, the gyms at all the schools. We made energy efficient systems. We added solar panels and much, much more. But we didn't address any of the spacing issues at that time. So now that we're at a turning point to address the current enrollment because the levels are above capacity. And the space is going to be absolutely critical with the projected enrollment numbers that we're looking at. We've heard from statistical forecasting with enrollment projections. We've heard from our architect, our bond counsel, as well as the finance team. And all 4 district hired professionals have helped us reach this point. So what pushed this bond referendum to the front burner right now was the enrollment projection. But the benefits of borrowing from the state make it prudent to think about our needs that are present and on the horizon for the district. Question 1, we'll ask the taxpayers to vote on adding space and renovations to the schools, to the elementary schools. And question 2, we'll ask about improving the HVAC systems and security. So on December 12th, we're asking the voters to decide the future of the schools through 2 different questions. Dr. Shorter?
Thank you for that background, Dr. Gorman. I know we've been working at school level for years to find enough space for the ways instruction has changed. So certainly it takes a lot just to operate and maintain the 7 schools in Montville Township. So thank you for that information.
Absolutely. Thank you.
We're going to turn our attention now to the district's architect, Mr. Ross, who will describe what improvements are proposed for our schools. And of course, Dr. Gorman, feel free to jump in to describe, more details about why those are proposed. So, Mr. Ross, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Schroeder. So to do a quick recap on the 2 questions, question 1 being the added space, question 2 being the improved HVAC and security. Just go over the high level and then we'll go into a deeper dive of question 1. So the referendum includes, so at the high school, starting school by school, security vestibules. Lazar Middle School is HVAC upgrades. The Cedar Hill Elementary School is additions, renovations, and HVAC. The Hillsdale School is additions, renovations, security vestibules, and HVAC as well. Valley View is again additions, interior renovations, the added security, and HVAC upgrades. William Mason is again the same, additions, renovations, parking, security vessels, and HVAC. And lastly, Woodmont is additions, renovations, parking, security, and HVAC. So to now focus on question 1, again, over the years, the district has repurposed space throughout the elementary schools to meet their needs. Some classrooms are divided by tabletop partitions to enable 2, 3, or even 4 lessons to be taught simultaneously. The bond proposal seeks funding to renovate certain classrooms that are now divided by temporary partitions into permanent rooms. As Dr. Gorman stated, enrollment has steadily increased over the years, and more growth is forecasted in the future. Keeping up with today's teaching approaches that require more small group instructions and added flexibility. This is not just in Montville, this is across the country. And this is not just for special education, but for all kinds of personalized instruction, including students who are advanced, who learn differently than in a large group, or who explore non-academic instructions like music. Question 1 includes a total of 23 new classrooms added throughout the elementary schools, as well as dividing 14 existing classrooms into 28 right-sized small group instruction spaces. Improvements in these renovations are much greater than temporary partitions and movable walls, and will properly have the correct HVAC, lighting, and other systems. Diving into more detail at each school, Cedar Hill Elementary is the addition of 4 classrooms and the renovation of 4 classrooms to creating 8 new SGI rooms. Hilldale addition and renovation includes a new multi-purpose room for flexible large group instructional areas, 3 additional classrooms, renovations of 2 existing rooms to create 4 new classrooms, and the addition includes the new security vestibule. At Valley View, the addition is for 5 additional classrooms and renovation of 2 existing rooms to create 4 new classrooms. At William Mason is a new multi-purpose room, 7 additional classrooms, renovations of 3 classrooms to create 6 SGI rooms, a parking lot. And then lastly, Woodmont is a new multi-purpose room, 4 additional classrooms, the renovation of 4 rooms to create 8 SGI rooms, and modifications to the parking lot. And the first phase of these additions would be ready to be online for students in the school year of 2025.
You're exactly right. Thank you for doing that, Mr. Ross. As I said before, we're 100 students over capacity already, and that's why we've been doing these makeshift rooms. We have students learning in our storage areas that we've converted back into the libraries, and we even have students in the hallway. And we've had this for several years now. We've also added a number of our students to the district coming back from out of district for special education purposes. We've also added a number of our students for pre-kindergarten students that are going to our schools now. And we've increased our staff to meet the needs of these students. So students' needs for basic skill instruction, for gifted and talented, and for other pull-out reasons are also adding to this space crunch. The kids are learning differently, and we're using the space differently than what we did years ago.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Ross and Dr. Gorman, for that information. Much appreciated. One of our panelists is in a great position to tell us how the space crunch impacts our elementary schools every day. Mr. Malucci is the principal at William Mason Elementary School, and he has worked in the field of education for 26 years, including the past 14 years in Montville schools. I know you've seen a lot of changes, right, Mr. Malucci?
Thank you, Dr. Shorter. Yeah, when I first came to Montville about 14 years ago, I would say the enrollment at the time was around 230 students. Currently, we're at 291 students. And as Dr. Gorman mentioned, many of our special needs students remain in district now. So I've seen a lot of changes, and I've certainly seen an uptick in enrollment over the past couple of years.
Thank you, Mr. Malucci, for your insight on the ways education has changed and the way our schools have changed because of that. Let's take a little bit of break and remind everyone of some important key points. First, to ask a question, you could send it via email to referendum@montville.net, as I mentioned earlier. You can also use the Q&A feature of the Zoom webinar. If you move the cursor to the bottom of your screen, you could see the letters Q and A. Click on that icon to click to submit a button. I'm sorry, click on that icon to submit a question. Also, please include your name and your street address with your question, whether you send it by email or through the Q&A feature. A lot of questions can be answered on our web pages, so you'll want to read through those. And last, it would be helpful if you could send your question during the time when the topic is being addressed, so that we're not skipping around unnecessarily. All right, thank you. For anyone who is just learning about the referendum, this is a good time to review what's on the ballot on December 12th. The building additions and the renovations are all grouped in question 1 on that ballot. Question 1 is all about adding space and renovating existing space to accommodate current enrollment, projected enrollment, and the ways that education and support services are provided. And Dr. Gorman spoke to that a little bit earlier. The second question on the same ballot addresses different needs. Those of HVAC systems, security vestibules, and some site issues such as parking lot improvements. Mr. Ross, please summarize what kinds of upgrades are proposed for the heating, ventilation, and air conditioning systems in most of our schools. Those HVAC improvements are grouped in question 2 on the ballot. So, Mr. Ross, if you would share a little bit about that information with us.
Glad to. Question number 2 includes the upgrades to heating, ventilation, and air conditioning systems at every building except for the Montville Township High School and the Valley View Elementary School, where work has already been completed on those 2 projects, either through the previous referendum or through the capital budget. The bond proposal targets buildings where heating systems are old to the point of repair risks and energy inefficiencies. Improved systems would be more efficient and perform a higher and finer level of air filtration due to current events in the world. How is this different than the 2017 referendum? The 2017 referendum included HVAC system upgrades only at the high school. The middle schools and elementary school HVAC systems remained untouched. However, secondary units providing only air conditioning was introduced to the rooms that did not have AC at the time. Additionally, the 2017 referendum included HVAC controls to increase the existing system's efficiencies while also increasing the indoor comfort levels at each building. The HVAC control systems previously installed will remain the backbone of the new equipment proposed in this referendum. Dr. Gorman, anything?
So I just wanted to add to that with Valley View, that was, we upgraded the HVAC systems there with our own capital reserves money. So we were able to update that, and that system has been working extremely well with the students. I know we also swapped out the bulbs, light bulbs a few years ago with I made them LED to help with our efficiencies and costs there. So there's been a lot of improvements over the past couple of years that we've done internally with our money that we've saved to help offset a lot of these costs and not have to go to the taxpayer with them in the future.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Ross and Dr. Gorman, for that information. You know, HVAC is the kind of thing that we rely on every day without even thinking about it necessarily. I guess that's not always true for someone with allergies or asthma, no matter what the temperature. You know, modern HVAC is a concern for them. So something that's definitely very important. We place a high value on here in district. Another concern is security. That's always a priority, and moving forward with two-stage vestibules at all schools is an important component of the referendum. Question 2 on the ballot includes HVAC updates and secure vestibules for 5 of our schools. I know, Dr. Gorman, if you'd like to comment on that.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's the most recent one that we just built at Lazar. You can see we have the two-stage entry system right there. So any visitors have to be buzzed into the first area. We have a security guard that sits right there, right in front of you. And then they have to get buzzed through the second one once they've been, their identification has been identified and they're able to come back into the building. A little bit off the screen, what you can't see is almost like a bank teller window. So any kind of deliveries or anything like that can be pushed through the windows and nobody has to come in from the outside. The system has worked extremely well so far. And we're going to replicate that right now with, again, internal money. Lazar was built off of our capital reserves money, and we're doing the same thing at Cedar Hill. And we've already just laid the foundation, and we'll be building that in the next couple of months. So that'll be 2 of the schools that will be done through internal monies. But the other 5, you know, we're going to address through the referendum.
Okay, great. Thank you for that clarification, Dr. Gorman. Mr. Ross, could you please tell us how security can be improved at those schools?
Yes. Two-stage entrances are now the standard in most schools, no matter the grade level. And this continues the trend of the recently completed middle school vestibule and the to-be-completed Cedar Hill vestibule that will be done by the end of the year. Visitors who arrive on site will only be able to enter the building once being buzzed in and vetted on who they are and why they're there, to prevent unfettered access throughout the building. Some of these security vestibules will be built inside the existing footprint, such as Valley View, while the other will all be building additions that will tie into the style of the construction of the existing building, similar to how the Cedar Hill security vestibule blends into the existing building and the recently renovated gymnasium. And like Dr. Gorman said, this question number 2 is security vestibules at the remaining 5 schools: the high school, Hilldale, which will be included in the new classroom addition, the Valley View, Woodmont, and William Mason.
All right, thank you, Mr. Ross. We've come to the first of 2 time slots set aside for questions from the public. We'll answer a few of those, and then we'll come back to our panelists to learn about the funding plan for these improvements. If you want to send a question, you can do that either through email or through the Q&A function on the Zoom menu at the bottom of your screen. We may combine, as I had said earlier, similar questions in the interest of time tonight. And also, please include, as we mentioned a couple of times, your name and your street address with a question. So the first question that we have is as follows. If so much new housing is being built, then why doesn't the additional property tax revenue cover the costs of improving the schools? So I'd probably direct this question to Ms. Slunt, our business administrator, to answer that one.
That's a really great question. The way that the taxes are affected in town by new construction is that new houses and the new homeowners that live in those houses do produce taxes, and they go into the pie, so to speak. And that allows for every amount of the individual people who live in town to pay a little bit less in taxes. So although each of the residents of Montville will pay a little bit less in taxes as a result of the income that's coming in from these new housing developments and the additional tax base. It doesn't go directly to schools. The school funding model is funded separately, and it's funded based on a growth model off of our previous year's budgets, in which we can only raise our taxes by 2% over that from the previous year. So if we look at the amount that was raised last year to run the schools in terms of salaries and benefits and transportation and heating and cooling, we only can increase our budget each year by 2% above that. And as a result, we are very restricted as to how much we can actually include in a regular operating budget related to capital improvements. Capital improvements that would be included in this particular referendum are so large, we don't have the ability to include those in our regular operating budget.
Okay, great. Thank you, Mrs. Lund. Question number 2, and this is one I know we've received and have spoken about frequently. If we add space at the elementary schools now, won't we need space at the middle school and high school in a few years? And I think Dr. Gorman probably would be the one to answer this, as I've heard you share some information about that in the past.
Yeah, the answer is no. The ebb and flow of the enrollment numbers can be handled at the middle school and the high school. They have different rotating schedules in the sense of the kids change classes, and they'll be able to handle this fluctuation for their next 5+ years that we've calculated out. It's the elementary schools, as I showed you before. We are currently over 100 students over capacity right now, and have been for quite a while. I give you one example is just Hilldale. Hilldale's had music in the hallway for a number of years. They've had other classrooms in the hallway for a number of years. So this problem has been plaguing us for quite some time now. So, and that's a perfect example of music in the hallway at Hilldale. So, no, the middle school and the high school can handle it. So right now, the high school is going down with their enrollment, and the students from the elementary schools will get to them about 5-6 years from now, and then the high school will go back up to its current levels. But they can expand and handle this over the next course of time. Mr. Malucci, can you just talk about a little bit of the classrooms and what you're seeing with the space crunch right there at your school?
Sure, yeah. If you want to throw a picture up, I'll be happy to talk about it. I would also add too that, you have to remember a lot of students when they're done with middle school, they do tend to kind of sparse out in terms of going to private schools. You don't see that a lot with elementary, but there are quite a lot of, private schools in the area. So sometimes you see a little bit of dip in the high school enrollment. However, those kids tend to stay locally for elementary school and Lazar at middle school. So it's not uncommon to see quite a few kids go to a private high school. But what you're looking at here is which was previously the back of the William Mason Media Center. We threw up a wall over the summer. The wall is off to the left. I'm not sure if you can see it. There's a teacher over there in the corner if you look through the space dividers. And you have a small group instruction on each side of those dividers. Most likely 2 different grade levels with upwards of 5 or 6 kids on each side of the divider. Certainly not an ideal learning environment. Obviously, you can hear the divider separates what you would see, visually. But unfortunately, you can hear the teachers, you can hear the students, and sometimes it's difficult for the kids to learn in that, that type of environment. But ideally, you'd like to have a small group in a classroom and, with more space, with better audio, visual, and technology in there. But again, this is a small group that you would see for a basic skills class, perhaps special education, ESL. So as, was mentioned before, small group instruction is sort of what, it's like 20, 30 years ago, we didn't see this. And so it's just, more of a necessity now. And again, this is the converted media center at William Mason. There was a couple other pictures. If you want to scroll through them, I'll be happy to talk about those as well. So right here, this is also William Mason School. What you see here is another small group instructional room. This was previously the school counselor's room last year, and another sheetrock wall was put up over the summer to divide that room. We have the CST, Child Study Team, on one side, and right here you're looking at another small group of instruction, and in the back you'll see the school counselor. So obviously, sometimes when she needs to have a sensitive phone call with a parent or meet with a child, and there's other children in the room, that can't be done. So oftentimes she'll come to the main office or find alternative space within the room to have those conversations with children and or parents. Again, it's certainly not optimal for her or for the students, but we're, again, we're doing the best we can with the space we currently have.
All right, thank you for that insight,
Yeah, and
Mr.
I just-
Malucci.
I
Sorry.
just want to jump in right there. I just want to
Yep.
clarify, Mr. Malucci's talking about that's the mobility. So we just looked at the numbers recently. We really don't lose any students going from 5th to 6th grade. So most of the students, like around 98-90% of the 99% of the students, go from the elementary schools up to Lazar, and then from Lazar to the high school, we lose up to about 9-10% of our students. So you're looking around 20 or so. What years ago we saw higher numbers, but the other numbers that we're seeing is kids go to high schools and other thing, and they try it, and then they come back sophomore, junior, and even senior year. So that number of students that are leaving Montville is actually lower, and it gets down around 6% or something like that, 6-7% depending on the school year, and that's another measurement of the attractiveness of Montville. So people are staying, whereas maybe a while back they might not have come back, but they are staying in our school system. But we will be able to handle the influxes that we will see at the high school level or at Lazar.
Okay, great. Thank you for that clarification, Dr. Gorman. The next question, it looks like I'll probably be directing this to Ms. Slun. What is the expense of a separate referendum? Why not do this referendum as part of the ballot that we voted on a few weeks ago?
The state of New Jersey restricts school districts to bring issues of referendum to the voters to specific dates. And the dates that we had available to us, according to the statute, were in September, the November date, which was part of the general election, and December 12th. As part of that process, we have to go to the state of New Jersey Department of Education to have them review our request to go to referendum. In that review, they're looking at the finances in terms of whether or not we can sustain this particular referendum. They're also looking at the building and the specifications that are created by the architects to see if the buildings conform educationally to the programs that are instituted by the state. That process of going through those different reports occurred, and by the time we heard back from them in order to give us authorization to move forward to referendum, we had already missed the September date and the November election date. So we had no other choice but to go to referendum in December. And that would mean that we incurred separate costs for that.
Okay, great. Thank you. Our next question, and I think I'll direct this probably to Dr. Gorman. Why is there not an in-person forum to discuss the questions?
So over the past year, we've been doing public presentations at the board meeting. Our architect, Mr. Ross, has done, I think, 2 of them, if not 3. And we've had many parents attend and town people attend these forums. Questions have been asked all throughout the year, and we've been answering them. Then we decided to go on the road, so to speak. So we've done another 6 or 7 virtual ones to the community. And then just this past couple of months, we've done about another 6 in-person ones with the different community groups and different forums. So we've done about a dozen of them virtually as well as in person. We've had great attendance at all of them. And this is just one more opportunity for people to hear more about this referendum. In addition, we found that, with our PTA meetings and a lot of other meetings that we hold, we see attendance at our virtual meetings triple, if not quadruple. And because it's less onerous for a lot of the parents, they don't have to worry about babysitting, they don't have to leave their house. And we're also able to record these sessions and allow people to view them later on if they, miss them. So that was the reasoning behind having this last virtual forum.
Okay, great. Thank you. And we'll continue with questions. They're pouring in, so that's great to see. The next question, probably towards Dr. Gorman again. Two-part question. How has enrollment changed? And what are the key drivers to the assumptions on the enrollment increase? New residential units or just organic growth?
It's both. So that one chart, maybe we could pull that chart up again that we had before. So you'll see right now at the bottom of the dotted line, we're currently 100 students over capacity at the elementary levels. The current housing, which is, the new housing that's being built, construction projects, post-COVID enrollments. We had a number of people that move out here from the city. We have higher birth rates, and we just have more people coming into town. The town is extremely, people love coming here. So they're moving in here, and they're coming in here with kids. And the planned housing, the 4 planned housing units is the white line. We're expecting to see another 150 students coming from that projection. So when you add that all up, in 5 years, we're going to be over 400, about 410 students over capacity in our elementary schools. So that's what's driving a lot of this. But let me just go back again. But the key point of all this stuff is getting the referendum, but also the state aid that will help offset it. So we're looking at $9.4 million in state aid to help offset this costs. And the Board of Education will be kicking in $6.6 million to help offset these costs as well. So you're looking at really about $54 million that's being asked of the taxpayers.
Thank you, Dr. Gorman. Good point on the state aid there and that amount. That can't be underscored enough, I think, throughout this evening. Next question, Mr. Ross. I think you'll probably get this one. The question is, what exactly is planned for HVAC upgrades? During a recent visit, there was a smell of mold/mildew throughout one of the schools. Is that smell going to be addressed with the HVAC upgrades? And if so, how?
Sure. So the HVAC upgrades will include district-wide renovations and upgrades to the systems, obviously. The existing unit ventilators are quite old. Parts and pieces are hard to source. So they're going to be upgraded. Part of those upgrades will be newer controls, higher filtration rates, better humidity control. The humidity control will then alleviate any of that musty air smell. And interior comfort levels will definitely be increased, especially with the introduction of new AC.
And just to clarify, Ms. Lund, you can jump in too, but there's a difference between a musty smell and mold. And we've had rooms tested, and we don't have a mold issue in our classrooms.
Great, thank you for that. Our next question is related to security. So perhaps Dr. Gorman and maybe Mr. Ross can team up for this one. The question is, with the new potential security vestibules, what can we anticipate as new security protocols for our elementary schools?
So I was talking about before, and Mr. Ross, said that this is the new standard. So you have to get into the first doors. You have to be buzzed in. When you get into those doors, just say like a FedEx package, that FedEx package will be left there, and then someone will come outside the doors and grab it. So the FedEx person does not have to come into the building. For other people that need to deliver things, they could put it through the secure mail slot, like a bank teller window. And then if they want to come in for an appointment, or if they have to meet with somebody, they have to get buzzed in the second time. So we can have people, for lack of a better term, situated in this vestibule, so that they can't get direct access to our students. Along with that, on the outside perimeter of the whole school, we've also hardened our exterior. So we've done a lot of work on the doors and a lot of other areas to make them more hardened for that. I just want to emphasize also, we have a great working relationship with the police. In fact, Dr. Shorter and I met with the chief and our school resource officer this morning. We do that on a monthly basis, and then other times on ad hoc basis. So we meet with them, we talk to them. They are constantly patrolling our schools. The squad cars go around. The officers get out of their squad cars, and they're like the local heroes. They go into the schools, they meet the students, they talk to them at various times. Their schedules are varied, so when they're popping into schools. And our school resource officer also goes around to all the schools and sees what's going on and checks in and makes sure they're secure. On top of that, we have a full-time officer in Lazar as well as the high school. So by and large, we're pretty secure, but we want to make this the standard, this two-door entry vestibule system, the standard in Montville, and we want to add it to the 5 existing schools that still need to be done.
Right, and if you can go back to that screen, that was the Lazar vestibule, and that actually leads to the next question. So, Dr. Gorman, you could also answer this one. What's on your screen right now is the vestibule at Lazar, and the question was, when was the new vestibule built at Lazar? I know it was very recent, so Dr. Gorman, go ahead.
Yeah, you're correct. So it was done over the summer, a little bit of last year into the summer, and then I think it was pretty much done the first month or so that school started. And, there was some tweaking that we had to do, but it's been fully functional for the past month or maybe even 2 months by now. And as I said before, the one at Cedar Hill, we've laid the footing and we're going to be starting to build up the walls and everything else and getting the glass in shortly to make that one working before the end of the school year.
Okay, great, thanks. The next one is more of a detailed, specific question related to the multipurpose rooms that are part of referendum. So maybe Mr. Ross could answer this one. Would the new multipurpose rooms include a stage?
Currently, the program for the multipurpose room does not include a fixed stage area. It's more of an open space that could be utilized for gym, lunches, or small group instruction.
Mr. Malucci, can you just jump in about how the lack of having this multi-space area at your school, how it affects the schedule and other things?
So when you have a multi-purpose room that serves as both a lunchroom and physical education room as well, you're really tied and bound to the times that you have lunch. So for example, if we have lunch from 11 to 12:30, or, in the case of last year, we had, 4 lunches. So you can be basically tying up the all-purpose room from 11 to 1. When you talk about setup time, that's another 20 minutes, and breaking down and cleaning up another 20 minutes. So you're talking about almost 2.5 hours where that space is not used, right? So in other words, you can't have any physical education classes whatsoever. It really kind of hamstrings you in terms of creating phys ed classes for kids in K through 5. You can only have those classes at certain periods of the day. When you have both, a gym and an all-purpose room, separately, as some of the schools do, you can have lunch and recess going on at the same time as well as having classes. So again, when you have just one space that's available for both PE and lunch, you're basically taking away any classes that could go on for upwards of 2.5 hours.
Thank you for that, Mr. Malucci. Good point.
And
Dr.
just
Gorman,
wanna-
anything to add there?
Yeah, just Dr. Shorter, we have, right now, we have those extra spaces at Valley View and, I'm just blanking, Cedar Hill. So we're proposing at William Mason, Woodmont, and Hilldale to build onto those schools who do not have those types of, those multi-flexible area spaces.
I would just like to add one more point too, and it's just something to think about. When on those days that you cannot go outside for recess because of inclement weather, the kids basically go back to the classrooms. If you have another all-purpose room kind of area, it's a lot larger space that you can put more students, and obviously they can do other activities, and it just creates a little bit more flexibility within the building and for scheduling purposes as well.
Great point, thanks. All right, next question. This is probably maybe start out with Dr. Gorman, but that the panel may want to chime in on this one. What about building another elementary school instead of all of these renovations?
Yeah, I'll just start it off and then Mr. Ross and Ms. Slunk can maybe jump in. But we did. We looked into that as well as many, many other options. We looked into building above a lot of the buildings, and that was just cost prohibitive with the steel and everything that went along with that. We looked into adding onto the back of a lot of the buildings, but then you have protected wetlands and other protected areas that restricted us with that. Some of the areas also had a lot of bedrock that would require blasting, which would add to a lot of the costs. So those were some of the issues that we ran into. On top of that, if we were going to build a totally separate school on different property, we would have to purchase that land and then start to build. There's no property for sale that's big enough for us right now to address that issue. And if we did, whether it was a separate property or even if we built on our property a second space, so like we looked into building a separate building at the bottom of Woodmont down by the baseball field and things like that, that would require hiring additional staff, additional administrators, additional nurse, and that would all add costs to our annual operating budget because it's a separate building. And again, that would add a strain to our budgets. So we did look into a lot of these issues, and just for cost purposes alone, going back to what I said originally, we were trying to find the lowest cost solutions to help address these problems in our schools.
Dr. Shorter, I would just add, that was something that came up in my hometown of Livingston. And I will say a lot of the families felt that it took away a little bit of that hometown neighborhood school feel, right? Who would go to that new school?
Excellent point. Yeah, we strongly believe in that neighborhood community type school. And that's something we want to hold on to as well. Mr. Ross, did you have something?
No, just to reiterate that, we initiated this process probably a year ago or more with a feasibility study of where we could build. And we had to look at state and federal land use regulations, whether it was wetlands, habitat, migration patterns, and endangered species. So those are all taken into account, and we're trying to monitor that, maintain that.
Another point is that it's very expensive to build a new school. When we looked at the cost of going, and even aside from the land purchase that might have to occur, the cost of actually building the facility is significantly more than what is being proposed as part of the additions on the 5 elementary schools.
Excellent point.
Okay, the next question deals with some things I think we've heard a lot about recently. With inflation and supply chain issues, what is the board's contingency plan if the project bid proposals are more than is currently budgeted? How is this process of contractors being handled for bidding? So maybe Mr. Ross can review this process, and perhaps Mr. Solomini can explain the legal restrictions for this. Whoever wants to take this one.
Sure. I'll start. Tony, you can jump in. So all of these projects will be fully designed, and we'll put together a set of construction documents and specifications, and we'll go out to public bid. Through the public bid process, contractors will review the drawing sets and provide their associated bid for the construction. That will be all inclusive. They will then be held to the contract to complete the project for their bid, no matter what happens during the course of their contract, whether inflation goes up, prevailing wage costs go up. And throughout the entirety of the referendum, we cannot exceed the total amount that is voted upon. So that is it, not a dollar more can be spent.
Yeah, I mean, just to piggyback on that, when Will prepared the, excuse me, the specifications that went to the DOE, there's also contingency in those numbers. There's also escalation that takes into consideration because these projects are going to be built out over several years. And also, as Will pointed out, a safeguard to the public is the board, no matter what the source of funds, cannot spend a cent more than is voted on by the voters without getting additional voter approval. So that it's not like where you or I might do a home improvement project where we keep adding to it, we keep thinking, we keep rethinking about it. This is a set established budget, and the board cannot spend 1 cent more than is authorized by the voters.
And just to jump on that, can the two of you, or maybe Ms. Lunt, jump in about the competitive bidding process and how that works and how we have to open them up later on and stuff like that?
Yeah, part of the state statute indicates that we are required as a public entity to go out for public bid, which means that we open it up for any qualified construction vendor to bid on the job. We read those bids publicly at an open forum, and then we are required to pick the lowest responsible bidder, which will then provide the most cost-effective price to that particular project, and will hopefully provide a quick and good vendor to provide us with services. In terms of the process that occurs during construction, I mean, for any of the schools, individuals who have lived through some of our construction projects, you know that everything does not work to plan. We have experienced, particularly since COVID, the slowdown of the supply chain and equipment or resources not getting to us on time. And we accommodate those situations by moving classes, by changing doors, by accommodating the students so that safety and security are always at the forefront of our concerns, and we figure out a way to make it work. So if that was to occur during the process, which it probably will, of this construction, we will work around it. One of the things that we will absolutely be doing is, in the case of the new additions, we will not poke through from the existing building to the new building until the construction is completely done. So the area that is being constructed will be completely closed off. And when finally it is ready for us to take occupancy, that's when we will then connect the new building and the old building together. And that's just one example of how we accommodate the construction while we are also still in session.
Okay, great. Thank you. This next question is actually a few questions in one. It'll probably take a team effort by the panelists to answer, but I'll get started on it. What are the alternatives or options if the referendum doesn't pass? And does the proposal get revised and resubmitted for a new vote? Does the state portion of funding diminish? And what would be the time frame for another vote? So you kind of have four questions in one there. So who wants to start on perhaps, what are the alternatives or options if the referendum doesn't pass?
So maybe I'll just start with a quick overview, and then everybody else could fill in where I messed up or missed something. So there is we don't have a plan B. If you really want to think about it, we're in plan B right now. We have the students, we've got them in the hallway, we got them everywhere else. So that's where we're at right now. We're going to plan C, which is actually asking the referendum, the voters to vote on this to try to help us address that issue. If it does not pass, then you'll be looking at students being just put more students into the classroom. It's that simple. And then we can address that later on. I think we could go out for the next one in March if we were ready, but there's a lot of state approvals that would have to happen with that. We would have to decide on what's going on, and that's not something, that takes a lot of time, and we'd have to get Mr. Ross to look at some new figures, and we have to apply for state aid. So all those formulas get changed. But what you'd be directly looking at, you'd be seeing more students into the classrooms that we already have, and seeing, class sizes increase. Anybody else want to jump in right there? Or?
Sure. This is part of this referendum is the district is eligible to receive debt service aid. That debt service aid is only eligible if you have an approved referendum and you issue debt. So if the referendum fails, obviously you can't authorize the authorization of the bonds has not happened. We can't sell the bonds. Therefore, we lose the aid on these projects. Additionally, in terms of timing, you're correct, Dr. Gorman, the next referendum date is March 14th, but the board would need to take action more than 60 days in advance to have a referendum on that date. And basically, there would be no time for Mr. Ross to go back and to get any of those letters revised. So unless the board decided to go right out 2 months from now with basically the same questions, it would be virtually impossible then, and the next available referendum date would be next September.
And just in, go ahead, Ms. Flynn.
No, I was gonna, go ahead, because I'm gonna jump on another part of the topic.
So what I was just going to say was, right now in the hopper, we're looking at different projects throughout the district. So we're trying to address some of the issues at Lazar. We want to renovate and fix a lot of the science labs there. At the high school, we're looking at some of the athletic fields and changing some of those things around, as well as the auditorium at the high school. And we have some preliminary plans of what we have to do to address that. But that money would be coming out of our capital reserves budget. If the referendum does go down, then we'd have to reprioritize our priorities and our projects. So we would have to say, okay, if the voters didn't want this and HVAC or security is still top of the mind for all of us, and we have to now take this out of our capital reserves money, then we'd reprioritize the list and we might not be able to get to the science labs at Lazar, the auditorium at the high school, or the athletic fields, just to name some of the projects. We got, plenty of projects over the next couple of years to address, but that would greatly hamper our progress in these areas.
That was exactly what I was going to say. Just as an addition to that, it's the amount of time it's going to take. There's only a limited amount of funds that are available as part of our savings. As a result, it will be years before we're able to finish all of the security vestibules, all of the HVAC that's in this proposal, and then begin to be able to focus on things like science labs at Lazar or the auditorium at the high school. So you're taking the timeline and you're extending it by anywhere between 5 and 10 years before we would finally finish all of these projects.
And that would mean no other additional projects on top of that, because that would eat up the bulk of the money.
Okay, good. Great answers for a complicated question. The next one, I know Mr. Ross touched upon this a little bit earlier, not in detail, but it was mentioned. The question is, I believe there are state protected areas around our schools to ensure the habitats of animals. What is being done to minimize the impact on the species and their habitats surrounding our schools where construction is proposed?
Sure. So I briefly touched on this, but we're trying to be as environmentally conscious as possible. The proposed additions are already in some sort of developed area, whether it's an existing parking lot or an existing playground, and not in an unbuilt up area. We're not deforesting or tearing down a mountain to do any of these construction. So for instance, at Cedar Hill, the plan for the 4 classroom addition is to extend off of the south side of the school where the existing playground is. And then that playground will get relocated and reconstructed in another area of the school grounds.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Ross. The next one, I'll open up to the entire panel. Why were all these new developments approved if there wasn't capacity in the elementary schools?
Just say that again.
Why were all these new developments? I assume the
Okay.
person asking the question is the housing developments in town.
Okay.
Why were they approved if there wasn't capacity in the elementary schools? And I know, Dr. Gorman, you talked a little bit about, being over capacity even before this, and then the developments happening and eventually, raising the number of students in our schools. So if you can provide some clarity on that.
So just very general, but the town and the schools are 2 separate entities. And the town needed to address certain issues that were going on with their housing issues that needed to be addressed. And the town several years ago came up with some ideas of how to build these 4 housing units. So then when we started looking into this and we hired our own demographer to look at the enrollment projections and what was going on, that's when we started saying, we're having a little bit of a space crunch at the elementary schools in particular. So with the projections that are going on, and again, the unforeseeable migration patterns that we see, more people are moving into town. The population is growing. More people are coming to our schools. Elderly parents are moving out and more families are moving in. COVID, nobody predicted that a few years ago. And you have more people moving in. it's a very desirable town, and they're attracted for one of the main reasons is the great school systems here. So you put all those things together, and then you have, it brings us to where we are today with asking the town people for a referendum.
Okay, thank you. And then the next question is actually related to it. Maybe Ms. Slunt wants to tack this one. So we'll continue down this path. Due to the housing developments that were just asked in the prior question, that were given pilot status, end up paying more or less to the township than if they pay regular taxes. So Ms. Slunt, I don't know if you want to explain what pilot means and how that impacts the schools or the district.
Pilot is a program that is an opportunity for you to get development into your town, particularly when it's difficult for you to secure that development. And it allows for the developers to negotiate with the township regarding payouts. Those payouts are supposed to represent about what would be paid in taxes over a period of time, but is an agreement that is reached, and it is in lieu of taxes, payments in lieu of taxes. That's what pilot is an acronym for. In terms of how it affects the schools, those taxes, because the payments are made outside of the tax base, they're not added to, the property value is not added to the tax base. So we are not getting the benefit of that bigger pie. If you think about it, that if we're all paying into a pie and each of us have to support something, the more money that goes into the pie, the smaller amount each of us individually have to cover. And that is true in the way the taxes work in the town, because there's nothing going into the pie related to these particular payments, that our individual contributions become just slightly larger. Additionally, as I mentioned before, the way that the schools get funded is separate and apart from the way the town collects taxes. The town collects taxes, and that's the tax base on which the schools draw from. But the amount that the schools can draw from is based off of a different statute that limits us to a growth increase. And that growth increase is 2% above what we had the previous year. So as a result, we will be drawing the same amount from a tax basis on the operating that we basically drew last year. But the pie is going to have to absorb more of it because it's not as large as it would have been.
Okay, thank you. And we'll move on to additional question here. I think this is one that's been asked in various versions of this question. And Dr. Gorman, this one's probably for you. Have you considered combining the schools so that entire grade levels in our town go to a certain school? For example, if all K2 students will attend Cedar Hill or William Mason, or all 3 through 5 grade students will attend Valley View or Woodmont or Hilldale, or some version of this idea, would we need to add classrooms to as many schools?
That's just shifting the problem. It doesn't change the enrollment issues that we have. You still have the same amount of kids in the same amount of schools. So that's just moving that around. There's 2 issues with that aren't great. One is, as we mentioned before, the town really values neighborhood community schools. And to redistrict kids once, if not twice, before they got to the middle school and high school, I don't think a lot of parents would be in favor of that. 2, you'd be busing kids then all over the place as well. And 3, the issue, there's a lot of studies, the more students struggle every time they transition. So when they transition from elementary school to middle school and then middle school to high school, there's a little bit of a pedagogical transition issue that a lot of the kids have, and that's nationwide, worldwide. So to do that multiple times, that could actually impede the academic learning progression of students.
Okay, thank you for that, Dr. Gorman. At this point, we're gonna move on. We have more time set aside later for questions, but we do want to stay on track with our schedule and be sure we cover everything that people need to know before voting. As it happens, we have gotten the questions about the funding plan. That's an important piece, obviously, of this kind of investment in our schools. So let's get to that with Ms. Katine Slunt, our business administrator, who can tell us about how property taxes would pay for these improvements over time. Katine?
So as we had mentioned, our operating budget is limited in its growth, and that when we look at needing additions of this magnitude and capital improvements of this magnitude, we have no other choice but to go for referendum in order to request that the taxpayers would increase their tax contribution in order to help support the change in the building across the district. Part of what we all as members of a town participate in is we all collectively support the schools, and the schools are the largest assets that the town owns. Aside from the academic programs and the athletic programs and all the other things that students receive as part of this educational program, we want to be able to maintain the assets and be good stewards of what's been given to us, as we will be handing this over to someone else in the future, and someone gave it to us before we got here. So these improvements are addressing academic issues, they're addressing space issues, but they're also maintaining the assets. What this will include in terms of this referendum, it's a $70 million referendum. We are asking to go out for a 25-year bond that will then be refunded over the 25 years through the taxpayers' contributions. In terms of how this gets calculated and how the amount gets calculated, we are estimating what we believe the rate will be for interest at 4.1%. What we do know is that many of the bonds issued in the past 6 months for municipalities and other governmentals in New Jersey have come in below 4. So our estimate is potentially higher, and therefore the amount that we're indicating as an impact on the taxpayer is a little higher than it may come in at once we actually get it. Additionally, we get the benefit of the state aid. If we do not go for referendum, then we do not get the benefit of the $9.5 million that the taxpayers in Montville have already paid into the state fund and have the ability to now draw out as part of this referendum. If we don't go for referendum, then we lose that opportunity. In terms of the impact is $410 annually on the average assessed house. In town, the average assessed house is $533,000. When we speak about assessment amounts, that is the amount that shows up on your tax bill, not the amount that Zillow is showing or what has been sold in your neighborhood. It's what you're being assessed on from a tax bill point of view. So when you look at that 410, you want to pull your most recent tax bill and see how much your house is being assessed for to determine how much that is. Breaking that same number down in terms of monthly, that's $34 a month for the addition on 5 elementary schools, the upgrade of the HVAC systems through most of the district, and the addition of the security vestibules in the 5 buildings.
Thank you, Katine. We have another panelist who can shed some important light on the way bond referendum works and why schools use that funding mechanism. So I'm going to call on Mr. Tony Solomini from the law firm of Willents, Goldman, and Spitzer. Mr. Solomini, tell us your role in this process and tell us why school districts like Montville Township use bonds.
Sure. The biggest reason why school districts throughout the state are using bond referendums is because for one, they can't fund their capital needs through their general operating budget. It's virtually impossible. I've worked on about 35 referendum in the last year or so, and it's because districts can't afford to undertake these major capital improvements in their operating budget. And as Ms. Slunt indicated, you have that debt service aid available. And for a community like Montville, you don't get a lot of aid from the state of New Jersey or from the federal government. So here's really an opportunity for you to kind of recoup some of the tax money that you pay into the state of New Jersey to come back to your community, because communities throughout the state of New Jersey are holding these referendum and are getting the benefit of that aid. So why not have the residents of Montville take advantage of that aid as well? Also, just to break down Ms. Lund's numbers even further, for question one, it's approximately a $325 increase, and for question two, it's about an $84 increase. The benefit of this as well is when you issue bonds, and bonds is kind of a fancy way to basically say, take out a loan. A school district doesn't have the legal ability to go into a bank and to just ask for a loan. So they need voter authorization to allow them to go to the bond market to borrow money. And this allows the school district to then finance those projects over the useful life. So here we're talking about a 25-year borrowing of that money. And what that does is it doesn't put all the cost on the current residents of Montville. It spreads the cost out over the useful life of those improvements over all the taxpayers that will pay their taxes over the next 25 years. Because why burden the current taxpayers with the entire cost of these improvements, where the residents over the next 25 plus years will benefit from those improvements and renovations? So allow everybody to contribute. Additionally, we talked previously about the safeguard where the board can't spend any more money than was authorized by the voters. Another safeguard is, as Ms. Slunt described before, all the projects will be publicly bid. Additionally, the financing is also publicly bid. So if and when hopefully we have a successful referendum, then we publicly sell the bonds, and they're sold to whatever investment institution will provide the lowest borrowing rate to the school district. So as Ms. Lund indicated, your financial advisor has projected about a 4.1% borrowing rate. Today I had a bond sale for 20 years for a school district with a much lower credit, and they were at a 383. So your financial advisor is comfortable with that 4.1 as hopefully a worst case scenario. But again, that's a safeguard to the public where we go out and we bid that financing and get the best interest rate.
Just a follow-up. One of the things that the board has consistently done through its issuances, and the last issuance was in 2017, is that the interest that's earned on the proceeds of the sale. So when we would sell the bonds, we would, at the end of that sale, receive $70 million in liquid cash. The board invests that money and will earn interest on it. And it has consistently taken the interest earned on those proceeds through the life of the entire construction and has given it back to the taxpayers in tax relief. Right now, due just to the economics of where we are right now and the rates of both earning and the rates of borrowing, it happens to be about the same amount. So the amount that we're paying to borrow the money is about the same amount that we are earning on the money. And we can offset the impact of taxes by appropriating those additional earnings from the interest earned on the proceeds to help offset taxes. So we're in an interesting and unusual time right now due to the way the markets are working.
Well, thank you all for that. The funding information is a lot to understand, especially for people who don't deal with it every day in school finance and state aid. However, all that same information is on the webpage devoted to the funding plan for this referendum. So please, make sure you check that out. The frequently asked questions page even has a way to calculate an estimated tax impact if you own a home that is higher or lower than average. And as Ms. Slunt said, there is a link on our search tool to determine your home's assessed value. So that's something you can definitely check out on our webpage. I want to remind everyone that this webinar is being recorded, and a link to that recording will be placed on those web pages at montville.net/referendum. If you've got a friend who missed out, please make sure that they know that. There's also a page devoted to the voting process. It has all the forms, dates and times, locations, etc., that a voter needs for this referendum on Tuesday, December 12th. I want to take a minute, now just to highlight a few of those details. That page has a link you can use to confirm you are registered to vote with a Montville Township address. There is a link to confirm where you should vote, Every registered voter should receive a sample ballot that has polling information on it. The county should send those a week before the referendum, so watch your mailbox for that. If you are a person who prefers to vote by mail, you can do that for this referendum also. The county sent vote by mail ballots about a month ago. If you thought you would get one but didn't, call the county clerk's office to confirm your vote by mail status, and directions are on the vote webpage. If you want to vote by mail, go to that page, download a vote by mail application. That's easy, and please understand the deadlines that are involved. If you want a ballot sent to you, the county must receive your application by Tuesday, December 5th, less than a week from today. Get that in the mail right away if this is how you want to vote. You can skip the mail process and submit your application in person to the county clerk's office in Morristown. You have until 3 p.m. the day before the referendum to do that. Vote by mail ballots can be postmarked by December 12th, dropped in one of the county's designated boxes by December 12th, or hand delivered to the county clerk's office in Morristown by, again, December 12th. The way they cannot be submitted is at one of the in-person poll locations. Now, what happens if you receive the vote by mail ballot but didn't realize it and it went into the trash? It happens enough that there is a safety net, and that's called a provisional ballot. If for any reason you are turned away at the polls, ask for a provisional ballot. Those are counted once election officials verify your voting eligibility and check that the valid ballot has not been submitted. If you prefer to vote in person, you can do that at your assigned polling place. Check the vote webpage and your sample ballot to confirm that. For this referendum, the polls are in the usual places. Polls will be open from 2 p.m. through 8 p.m. on Tuesday, December 12th. And again, all the voting details are on the webpage at montville.net/referendum. And on that webpage, look for the green bar at the top that says more information, and you'll easily get to the page about voting. Okay. So questions are continuing to pour in. So let's go ahead and read some of the questions that were sent in either by the email or through the Zoom webinar feature called Q&A. So here's our first one. Why can't Proposal 2, if approved, not be implemented if Proposal 1 is not approved? So maybe Mr. Solimini can take this one.
Sure. That's the way the board decided to structure the questions. So in order for question 2 to pass, question 1 also needs to pass. And that was, I guess, just the priority of the board to establish the questions in that manner.
Okay, thank you. Nobody has anything to add. We'll move on to the next question. For someone who doesn't have students in school, what are the benefits of this referendum? Maybe
Well,
Ms.
just
Slunt, do you want to take that, Mr. Gorman or Dr. Gorman?
I'll just play off of what Ms. Slunt just said before. You know, we're just talking about, if you go back to the original building of the buildings here in town through through today, this town has a history of passing referendums in the past. And each one of them is about taking care of the biggest assets you have here in town. And the buildings have to expand as more people are moving into town. And as with any building or a house or your car, you have to attend to all the different needs of those buildings as they age over time. And we're at that point right now. We did something in 2017 to address the most pressing issues then. And now we're here with more of a space issue that needs to be addressed. So this is what the town has done, and they've valued this over time, and they feel that, you know, the schools are something that's very important to them, and they've passed successfully a number of referendums in the past.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Gorman. This is another funding question. What attempts have been made to obtain governmental funding, e.g. from the New Jersey Schools Development Authority, which has been funding public school projects for approximately 20 years now?
We did investigate other funding opportunities. We have participated in the ROD grants, which were issued actually by the school authority for regular operating school districts to do roofing work. the issue with the school development authority is there's a limited amount of funding available. We had, as part of, for example, the ROD grants, we had submitted for $6 million worth of security and security work, as well as roof replacement work. And in the end, we only received about 2.5 of that request, because there's a limited amount that can be provided, and they're trying to spread it across everywhere. So although we are participating in other types of funding programs that are offered through the state that also are helping to offset the cost of these projects, the size and scope of this project was so large, we weren't able to participate in some of those other programs in order to cover the entire cost.
And under the legislation, the Educational Facilities Construction and Financing Act that I think the individual is referring to, there's two types of aid that are offered: a grant, which Ms. Lunch just described, and debt service aid. So this is the only other available funding mechanism under that law that is available to school districts. And the only way, again, if it's available, is if the referendum passes.
Okay, thank you. And I'm going to piggyback that off of one of our other finance questions here. The question is, the dollar amounts are presented in pieces. Is there an exact percentage of tax that each homeowner would pay?
I'm trying to think through that question.
You want me to read it again?
No.
Okay.
The way that
calculation-
you would,
Oh, go ahead.
oh, go ahead, Tony, if you can jump on it faster than I can.
Yeah, I mean, the way the financial advisor calculates it is that they use your total tax base and then divide it by the average to equal the average home value. And that's how they came up with the estimate for the $325 and the $84 to the average home. But as a strict percentage, each home pays X percent of the total. That's not been calculated, but I'm sure it could be calculated. But you'd have to know the value of each home. And, that's why I think this provides a level playing field. And also on the district's website, you can enter that information and find out what the impact is to your house.
And I just want to jump in right there. New Jersey also has a tax freeze for certain senior citizens that are eligible. So they could figure out where they fit in with that whole category, and they can apply for that if it's applicable. So some people might not see the tax increase with this referendum at all.
In terms of if this is the question that's being asked, if you're interested in seeing how much your tax would increase from a percentage point of view, my suggestion would be to use the calculator that is on our website, and that will indicate what the impact will be to you. You can add that amount to your taxes for the 2023 year, and then the difference between those would be the percentage increase above what you're currently paying.
Okay, thank you for those answers. Dr. Gorman, this is probably one for you. You did talk about this a little bit earlier this evening. So maybe this will give you an opportunity just to reiterate a couple of things that you covered.
Right. But Casey just froze. All right. Why don't we just move on and he'll come back in a second. Mr. Malucci, did you have anything to add if we've talked about a lot of these things?
No, nothing to add. I obviously the principals our point of reference would be the schools and what's currently taking place and how these improvements would help us in the future. So if there's so many questions, I'm happy to help and answer them.
I appreciate that. Dr. Shorter, we lost you there for a minute. Do you want to try that again?
I think I'm back. I'm not sure if the questioning came through, but the question was related to security vestibules and how might those change the daily protocols for the students? Would they have to be buzzed in, et cetera?
No, it doesn't change the daily protocols, and maybe Mr. Malucci could talk about what the protocols are. But right now at the high school, the middle school, the students, when the morning bell rings, the doors are open and we have faculty and staff there monitoring all those entrances. But as soon as those students are in, the doors are closed, then they're closed. and anybody during the rest of the school day. If a child came back after a doctor's appointment, they would have to be buzzed in at a later time, and they would have to go to the main office and check in. But Mr. Malucci?
Yeah, that's exactly correct. When students arrive and dismiss, obviously there's a large group and a large number. So the doors are unlocked and the students come in large numbers. When the bell rings at the elementary, middle, or high school, and students would be late, et cetera, left for a doctor's appointment and come back, that's when they would have to be buzzed in. But again, the buzzers would be for visitors, i.e. UPS, FedEx, or anyone else coming to the building. They would check in, ring the doorbell, find out who they are, what the purpose for coming to the building would be, and then they would be buzzed in if we were expecting them.
Okay, thank you for that. The next one's related to total student capacity. The question is, what is the projected total student capacity if these additions are built? For how many years into the future do we project the total capacity will meet demand?
So just roughly, like, our capacity is at 1,500. I don't know if Mr. Ross could look that up in a second where we'd be at, but we'll be able to handle the capacity that's being projected in the next 5 years. That's as far as the demographer can project out. After that, there's just too many factors to try to figure in. The demographer has a plus or minus error margin of 1 for each year that he's predicting. So at the end of 5 years, he could have an error margin of this prediction of about 5%. 5% of 410 is about 20 students plus or minus. So you could be looking at 430 students, or you could be looking at a little bit less. So, that's what we have to go on. I know Mr. Ross has built contingency plans into our buildings that it can absorb the ebb and flow over time. If more students came in. But I also think, don't quote me on this at all, but also Montville's reaching a little bit of a saturation point where there's not too many more places you could actually build a lot more to add in hundreds and hundreds of more students. But, so we're doing the best, we can do with the future predictions.
Just to add, I don't have the exact numbers in front of me, but we are designing to a 90% capacity to handle the ebbs and flows, like Dr. Gorman said.
Okay, great. And this is another one related to student enrollment. Maybe more a question for the demographer, but we'll give it a shot. You're saying that the elementary schools have increased enrollment, but have both the middle school and the high school had decreased enrollment. What drives this?
As we talked about earlier, we were talking about the increased birthing rates. Ms. Slunt, you maybe could talk about that a little bit, but we've also seen a lot more people moving into town with younger children. The people that are moving into town that do have older children, the high school and the middle school can absorb those numbers as they fluctuate. It's the elementary schools, as we mentioned before, are already over capacity, and adding more students is just exacerbating the issues that we're seeing. And that's why we're putting students in the hallway in these crowded areas of the converted storage areas. We have some students in the teachers' lunchroom and things like that. So we're doing the best we can, but I think most parents would agree that this is not the optimal learning experiences that they want for their children.
Just as an add-on, so Dr. Gorman mentioned the fact that we used a demographer to project out enrollment. This demographer has been used in the past by the district. It had done the projections for the previous 5-year period, and it was very accurate. His projections were very accurate, and those projections did show declining enrollment. The pounds was from enrollment in the schools was shrinking. What happened that we didn't exactly count on was the fact that COVID was going to change the way that events occurred in town. So whereas if COVID never occurred, we'd still be in a declining enrollment situation. That's what you're seeing at Lazar and the high school. With COVID, what we found was that it was an opportunity for families to move into town. It was an opportunity for people who were interested in selling their homes to get out of town. And what ended up happening is that flow, that migration, that change in population, even though the number of houses didn't change, who was living in the houses changed. resulted in a balloon, a bubble that occurred in the elementaries, and a bubble that was going to sustain itself for 5 years, for the 5-year period that the demographer looked at. So for 5 years into the future, that bubble is going to maintain itself. And that's putting the pressure on the elementaries. They're feeling it now as those students are already in the building, as well as the pre-K students that are coming up through and will be into the building as we move forward. What will happen is that bubble will then proceed forward. There will be a point in time when then Lazar will have that bubble move through, and the high school will have that bubble move through. And so this issue of enrollment is focused on the elementaries, but simply because that's where the bubble exists right now. As Dr. Gorman mentioned, because of the scheduling of the at Lazar and a middle school scheduling and a high school scheduling, where you have the changing of classes and you have the mixing of classes, especially at the high school, there's a lot more flexibility in terms of the number of students we can include in a particular classroom that is a little more restrictive at the elementary level. So it's making the situation even more extreme at the elementary level than you would necessarily see at the high school or Lazar.
Mr. Malucci, can you talk a little bit about what Ms. Lund is talking about how elementary schools have changed over the past couple of years, what you've seen at William Mason, about the learning environments, how they work more in pods, not in rows anymore, small group instruction, how you're pulling kids out, things like that?
Sure. As I mentioned, when I first arrived in Montville, I think our enrollment was roughly 240, 241, 242, and we're currently at 291. And, one of the things that was discussed is obviously the small group environment. And one of the, the more specific areas that we use small group environments would be with our special needs kids. So when I first arrived, there were many special needs kids that were serviced out of district, and we've since brought those students back to the district, with their peers in their home districts. And we started out with one classroom, then two classrooms, and don't forget that along with the special needs comes ancillary services, right? So students would need PT, OT, a variety of speech and language skills. So all of those things, create a need for space. We're now using 4 classrooms that weren't currently used for small group instruction when I first arrived in Montville. So again, to Dr. Gorman's point, ideally, you would like students to be with their peers, to be in small groups where they learn best with the teacher who's experienced and obviously their expertise is in that specific area. But when I first arrived in Montville, we didn't have all of those programs in our school. As I said, many of them were out of district placements. And so, just over the past 5 or 6 years, I would say that program is exploding both at William Mason and at Cedar Hill. So, a big change again over the last, just the last 5 years, I would say.
And you were talking about it, if you saw some increased enrollment at your school next year or so, and we didn't have this pass, you'd be looking at the same space crunch and maybe even possibly putting music in different areas?
Yeah, so as we discussed last summer, we were a classroom away from losing the music room, right? So we were projected to have 3 sections of kindergarten. Fortunately, we were able to maintain 2. We have a high number for kindergarten, but we didn't get that 3rd section that was projected. So, again, we were fortunate to not have to lose music, the classroom for the additional 3rd grade. However, that current kindergarten will be a 1st grade next year. Typically, I get anywhere from 6 to 10 students who are in private kindergarten coming to, public school for 1st grade. A lot of families enjoy where the kids are in preschool. They keep them there for kindergarten. So typically we get an influx anywhere from 6 to 10 1st graders. So I would almost guarantee that current kindergarten that has 2 sections will be 3 sections of 1st grade next year, thereby necessitating us pulling the music room.
And when you're right, you're not getting rid of music. You just mean you would have to use the music room and move the students for music into a general area or something like that. Correct.
So for example, the music would be on a cart, as we say, or art would be on a cart, where the teacher travels from classroom to classroom, as opposed to having a stationary classroom of their own.
Thank you.
Okay, we're we're just over our 8:30 mark. It's about 8:34 at this point. We have about 6 more really good questions, so we're going to try to push ahead here and see how many we can answer before, our hard stop at 9 o'clock tonight. A few questions were submitted that require some research, so we'll try to reach out to those citizens by phone or email. However, we're going to try to get through some of these remaining questions and respond to those tonight. So our next one is probably a question for Mr. Ross, as I'm sure you considered where to place the additions. The citizen asked, why not build the William Mason addition over the current basketball courts and then build new courts on the large field across from the playground instead of affecting the current parking lot? We can bring up the plan for William Mason and give a chance to explain it. And if you need to, I'll reread the citizen's question, Will, if you need it.
No, thank you. I think I understand the question. So what this plan does not show is the topography of the site. And this is a very hilly site. So from the north end to the south end is a drastic decline down a hill. So once we determined what the school needed to function, and it was the 7 classrooms and the multipurpose room, we started looking at options. One of the options that we talked on earlier was building up and doing a second floor, but knowing that the length of the construction project would be over the school year, and any construction would be could not happen over an occupied building. We didn't want to be that disruptive to the building and the student population, where they would have to be moved off site or school would have to be temporarily closed. So we moved away from building up and started looking at building out. And what we were looking at was floor plan efficiencies. So we didn't want to have any wasted space, additional corridors and stairwells add square footage. Square footages add cost. And then more cost would be a higher tax burden. So going back to where I started with how this site is extremely sloped, building in that lower basketball court area would be more expensive due to the need to build additional vertical circulation, staircases, elevators, and corridors to connect to the existing building. Those additional circulation paths would also affect existing spaces, specifically probably the gym, classroom, or potentially even the principal's office, which would in turn, we would have to relocate those spaces and build even larger floor plans. So basically this came down to available land, efficient floor plan and planning, and cost.
Okay, thank you for that, Will. Don't go anywhere. We're going to keep you on the hot seat for this one. It's a second question about William Mason site plan. And the question is, what effect would the addition have on traffic, neighboring homes, and the streets? And are there other options?
So included with the building addition at William Mason is parking lot improvements. And the parking lot improvements are one, just to increase available parking spots, but also to improve the traffic flow. I was actually just at the building probably a week or two ago during student pickup and witnessed the long line of cars. And one of the things we're going to try to do is to improve that to expedite the flow of traffic, so it is not a burden to the community.
Okay, thank you for that. It appears that we've gotten several questions. I know we touched upon this a little earlier about housing developments and pilot agreements and how developers decide to build in town. There seems to be some confusion about the school district's role in those decisions. So I don't know, Ms. Slunt, if you want to explain that a little bit, who makes those decisions and what role does the school district play in those decisions?
Sure. As I had mentioned before, we are, and Dr. Gorman also mentioned it, we are actually a separate entity from the town. The town manages the police and fire and roads and recreation programs for the town, we maintain the schools and the buildings related to the schools. So when a decision is made about land usage in town, that is not part of our domain because it doesn't relate to the schools and the functioning of the schools directly. That is a function of the town, and the town makes the decision on how land is going to be used. They are also the ones that are being held to certain legal restrictions as to how land is utilized for different groups of individuals in town and that type of development. So we did not participate at all in the pilot discussions. We don't participate in discussions of how land is utilized by the town. Mostly, we just manage what the impact that is on the schools.
Okay, thank you for that, Katine. The next question is related to bonds. So, Mr. Salamini, this might be one for you. The question is, it's my understanding bonds of this nature are local, state, and federally income tax free. How would local residents go about buying these specific bonds?
Well, I'm excited that we're talking about the purchase of bonds because that means we have a successful referendum. So that's a good sign. So what will happen, assuming we do have a successful referendum, we'll have a public sale of the bonds. They'll be bought by one financial institution, and then you can contact your broker who then can work with that financial institution and see what bonds are available for purchase. But yes, as an individual, you can buy bonds, and a lot of them are bought by pension funds, insurance funds, etc. But there is potential for you as an individual investor to buy them. So I would contact your broker once we have the bond sale.
Okay, great. You might want to keep your microphone on for this one also, and maybe Katine, you can add to this also. The next question relates to how does the Board of Education refund money to the taxpayers? The school board is separate from the town, so how does the school board give tax relief to taxpayers from the interest it receives on its invested money received from the lending institution?
I can do that one.
Okay.
So each year, the Board of Education develops an annual school budget that will be the budget for the subsequent school year. So at this time of year, the administration of the district is already in process of beginning to develop its 2024-25 school budget. And part of that school budget will include the request for tax dollars. One amount is for the operating fund, and one amount is for the maintenance of the debt service fund. So when a referendum passes, the taxpayers of that particular town have agreed that into the future, for example, 25 years, they will raise taxes on themselves to go and support the paying off of the debt that's related to that particular issuance as time progresses for that issuance. So when we come to needing to request that money to pay for those future payments, we have the ability to look at a number of different sources for that. One is that we will take into consideration the debt service aid that we've received. If you use, for example, the 2017 referendum, that produced the only outstanding issuance that the Board of Education has right now. And when we need the funds to pay for the payment of the bonds that are coming due for the 24-25 year, a portion of that amount is paid for by the debt service aid that came to us when the referendum was originally spoken about in 2017. The remaining amount would be tax dollars unless we could come up with another funding source. And one of the funding sources that is available to the Board of Education is to appropriate the interest earned on the money that it collected from the sale of the bonds. So on the $17 million that was collected when we went out for referendum in 2017, the interest earned on that, the board has the ability to appropriate and put aside and say, we're going to use that money earned. And instead of asking the taxpayers of Montville to put in their share, we're going to give their share or a portion of their share to the fund in order to go and pay off that debt for that particular year. And as I mentioned, the board has consistently, with each of its issuances, opted to take that interest earned on the proceeds and appropriate it towards the reduction of taxes for the payment of those payments into the future.
Okay, thank you. And we'll close with this one. Another finance question. Will the state still give Montville the $9.5 million if the referendum doesn't pass and the work is done over the next 5 or 10 years?
No, the only way that you're eligible for that money is if you have a successful referendum and you subsequently sell bonds. So the only way, and this is really important, and I know we've said it a couple times tonight, but the only way that money comes to Montville is if you have a successful referendum.
Which means that for projects that are part of this referendum that cannot wait for another referendum to come, we will be paying 100% of the cost of those projects.
Okay, great. So we've answered a lot of questions tonight. We extended our time a little bit during the webinar to get to those questions. I want to thank you, everyone, for your time and for your insight. It's greatly appreciated. Remember that this webinar was recorded and the link will be on the district's website tomorrow. I thank the panelists, but I also want to thank the people who made time to watch this and to send in their questions. Getting the facts about the bond referendum is really important before casting your vote on December 12th. As we've said multiple times tonight, if you have any additional questions, please visit montville.net/referendum. And finally, your opinion will not count unless you submit a ballot. So please make sure you get out there and vote. All details are on the web pages, including an application form for the mail-in ballot and the times and locations for voting. So with all of that said, thank you everyone again, and have a great evening.